Hello and welcome, I'm your Code Monkey. In this lecture we're going to add key rebinding to our options menu. So here we already have this nice options menu. We can modify the volume of the sound effects or the music. Next, let's handle key rebinding. Okay, so first let's build the elements over here on the UI. So let's create a bunch more buttons. But before that, let's actually make some text on the side and buttons in the middle. So let's create a brand new UI text. Call this move up text. Let's put it on the same size as the other one. So these got a font of 24. So let's put it the same thing, font of 24. Width and height, let's put both of these on 0. And down here, anchor it to the left, okay, down the middle and with no wrapping. Okay, so then over here, this is going to be the move up action. So we have move up, then we have the move down, move left, move right. Then we have the interact alternate, and finally the pause. So these are all of our actions. So let's just make all of these. So rename this. So this one is the move down. Then this one over here is the move left. This one is the move right. This one is the interact text. Then the interact alternate text. And finally the pause text. Now let's just modify the text on these. So that's the pause. That one is the interact alt. Then this one is the interact. Then we've got the move right. Then over here, the move left. And finally, we have the move down. Okay, so those are our labels for our controls. Now let's just make buttons over here on the right side. So let's duplicate one of these buttons. Let's put it over here and put it on some like 50 by 50. So this is going to be the move up button. And inside on the text, this is going to be pretty much just a W, okay? So we have the move up. Then we're going to have the move down, move left, move right, the interact alternate, and the pause. So we just need a bit more space, so let's move all of these up by quite a bit. Let's also move the music and the sound effects. So move all of these like that. Okay, let's just name all these buttons. So this one is the second one, so this is the move down. Then over here, the move left, then the move right, then the interact button, the interact alternate button, and finally the pause button. Okay, those are all the buttons. Let's just position all of the labels exactly where they should be. Okay, so here we have all of the options, all of our bindings. Now in code, let's grab references to all the buttons and all the text inside the buttons. So over here inside the options UI, let's add all of those. So first of all, for the text, we're going to have the move up text, then the down, left, right, and so on. So let's just do all of these. So down, then over here the left, then the right, then the interact text, the interact alternate text, and finally we have the pause text. And for the buttons, let's go up here, make all the buttons. So the move up button, then the move down button, then we have the move left button, then the move right button, then we have the interact button, the interact alternate button, and finally the pause button. Okay, so we have all of these references. Over here in the editor, let's just drag them. So let's make sure we drag them all correctly. So let's do it one by one. So the move up, this is the text. And actually it's not that one, so that's already a mistake right there. We want the text from inside the buttons. So let's pick up all of these text objects. So let's go into the options. So text inside the move up, let's grab that one. Then inside the move down, let's grab that one. And the left and so on. So definitely make sure you grab the right ones. Okay, that's all text. Now for the buttons, so that's the move up button, then the move down, then the move left, the move right, the interact alternate, and finally the pause button. Okay, great. And just to verify that everything is working, let's give proper names to these objects. So the move up button text. Okay, so I've renamed all the buttons. So now over here, it's much easier to verify that we have the correct references. So the sound, music, and so on. So definitely make sure all of these are correct. Otherwise, you might go crazy when things start to go a bit weird. So make sure these are all correct, all right? Now let's begin by updating the text inside over here. So let's go into our update visual. So we go into this, set the text, and now we need to get the binding text for this binding. So for that, let's make that function on the game input. Over here, let's just comment this out. Then over here on the game input script, let's make a function to get the bindings. So technically we could make something just to grab this player input actions, but again, we don't want the options UI to know what input system we're using. It should work regardless of what input system. So we don't want the game input to return anything of this type. Instead, we want to make a nice layer of abstraction. So for that, let's make an enum to define all of our bindings. So let's make a public, since we're going to access it, enum, call it binding. And over here, let's add all the bindings. So we've got the move up, then we have the move down, the move left, the move right, then we have the interact alternate, and finally the pause. So these are all of the bindings. Now let's make a function to return the binding text. So over here, let's make a public. We're going to return a string. Let's just name it get binding text. And as a parameter, let's receive a binding. Okay, so now here, let's just do a switch on this binding, and basically just match up the enum to whatever action we have. So for example, let's begin with the interact, since these are the simplest ones. So for this one, to get the bindings, we first go inside the player input actions, then let's go inside the player action map, then for the action, so in this case the interact, and then inside we've got the bindings. This is an array of all of the bindings. In our input map, we defined all of the keyboard bindings on index 0. Later on, we're going to add gamepad bindings, but for now we're going to have the keyboard always on index 0. So over here, going to bindings, access on 0, and let's just do a toString. Okay, so let's just return this, and let's do a default to return always this one, just like this. Okay, so let's do a quick log to see what this returns. So let's do it over here on the game input, just a debug.log, go into there, get the binding text for the interact. Okay, so let's test. And right away, yep, we do see it working. So the interact and the binding is on keyboard/E. But we don't want all of this text, we really just want to see the E. Thankfully, the input system has a really great function for just that. So instead of calling the general toString, let's call toDisplayString. Let's see. And yep, this one does return just the E key. Okay, great. So this is the one that we want. Let's do the same thing for all of the other simple actions. So we've got the interact, then we have the interact alternate, and we have the pause. So these are all the super simple ones. So just going to interact alternate, grab the binding on 0, and for the pause, binding on 0. Okay, so these are all super simple. Now the more complex one is the move. It's more complex because you can see all of the others just have one binding, except for the move over here we have a composite binding. So that's basically a binding which inside has 4 separate bindings. Basically the way that this works is that when you use a composite binding, all of these are added to the array. So this 2D vector is going to be on binding 0, then the up is going to be on binding 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Then the arrow keys, this one is going to be on 5. Then we have 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Let's do a log just to verify. So here, if we do one for the move up action, for this one, let's go into the move, and let's print out just the binding 0. Let's do a regular toString. Let's see what this returns. So up here, let's just modify our log to say the move up. Okay, so let's see. And yep, index 0 does have the move to the vector. And now if we print the one on binding of 1, yep, now this one does have the move on the doubling. So like I said, we can see that all of these composites, these are technically inside that one, but in terms of that array, it's just a flat array. So this one index 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that makes it super simple to add over here. So the move up, down, left, right. And let's just do all these. So we have all the bindings, and over here just 1, 2, 3, and 4. And instead of toString, let's call the display string. Okay, so the binding text, this is all set up. So let's go up here and get rid of our testing code. We can now call this from the options UI. So over here, let's do exactly that. So when we update the visual, let's go into the game input. Let's access the static instance. Let's get the binding text. And this one is going to be the move up. So that's it. This one is going to return a string. Let's write all of them. Okay, here are all of them. So let's see. And yep, there they are, all perfect. WSAD, EF, escape. Okay, great. So the visual is working. Now let's handle the rebinding. So let's add a click event. Let's go into the move up button. Let's go into the on click. Let's add a listener. And for the listener, over here, let's make a function on the game input to rebind this binding. So over here on the game input, let's do a public void rebind binding, and we receive a binding. Now for rebinding, I covered this in detail in the dedicated input system video. First, basically, we need to disable the action map. So let's go into the player input actions. Let's access the player and disable it. So we need to do this first. Then we're going to need to find the action. So player input actions. And for now, let's go into the player and let's just modify the move up action. So we're going to call the function perform interactive rebinding. This one, as you can see, takes a binding index. And if you remember up here, we saw that in order to modify the move up, it's on bindings index 1. So let's modify the one on index 1. Okay, so this is the function. This returns an object of this type, a rebinding operation. This is a pretty complex object where you can modify all kinds of things, add a bunch of limitations and so on. Like, for example, make a key not be able to be bound to the mouse or something. So there's tons and tons of options you can play with. Over here for the simple thing, let's just add an onCompleteListener. So this one takes in a callback, and this will be called whenever the interactive rebinding completes. So over here, let's define a lambda, so a callback, and inside we have this. By the way, over here, this is the same lambda expression that we saw previously. So exactly the same thing as this, except when we have just one parentheses, we don't need to add them. Okay, so like this. So then on this callback, we can see all kinds of things. Like, for example, we can see the action that we just rebound. This is going to contain all the data on the rebind operation. So for example, let's print out the path. So let's go into the action. Let's go into the bindings on index 1, and let's print out the path. So let's do a debug.log. And there's actually another one. So let's log the path and also the override path. These are two different things. Let's see why in a bit. We do this, and after we log, we also need to re-enable the player action map. So let's go into the player input actions, the player, and back enable this. Okay, so we're only going to need these settings on the rebind action. Then we can just call start in order to start the rebinding process. Okay, so this should work. Let's just call this from the options UI. So over here we have the click. Let's go into game input, instance, and let's rebind the binding. And for this one is the move up. Okay, with this, let's test. Okay, so here if I click on the button and now I click on the T key, and if there you go, it did work. So you can see that it print out the regular path, that is W, and the override path, which is T. So now if I exit out of the options, go back into the game, if I press W, nope, it does not move, but if I press T, yep, it does move upwards. Okay, great. So we have successfully rebound this one key. Now here, just one thing. In previous versions of the input system, when doing a rebind operation, you needed to manually dispose of this callback, otherwise it would throw a memory error. In the recent version that I'm using here, there's no error, so it seems perhaps it's no longer needed to dispose of the callback manually, but still there's no harm doing it just in case. Over here, callback.dispose. Okay, so with that, the key rebinding is working, except we have two issues. The first one is that it's not very clear that it's listening for an input, and the second one is that the text options also does not update. So let's solve both those. First, let's add a visual when waiting for a key press. So inside the game options UI, let's create an empty game object. Call this the press to rebind key. Let's stretch it out, so put it on 0 on everything. Okay. Then inside, let's add a UI image. Let's put it in black, and once again, let's stretch it out. Okay, now let's also add a simple text. And for text, let's say press a key to rebind. As usual, let's put the width and height on 0, put it in bold, center down the middle with no wrapping, and increase the size by quite a bit. Okay, so that's our super basic window. Now in the code, we just want to show and hide this, so let's do that. And let's actually begin with this hidden by default, so let's disable this object. So here on the options UI, let's add another serialized field. It's going to be a transform for the press to rebind key transform. So you have this, let's make two show and hide functions. So we show press to rebind key. We just go into that one, game object set active, this one into true, and another one where we set it to false. So just hide and set it to false. Okay, pretty simple. Let's make sure to hide this over here on our start. Okay, just like that. And for showing, let's show it when we actually rebind an action. So right in here, But since we're going to have tons of listeners to these events, let's actually make a nice separate function to handle all of the rebinding logic. So down here, let's make a function, rebind binding. We receive a game input.binding. And then first we show the press the rebind key. And then let's go into game input, access the instance, and tell it to rebind the binding and pass in the same binding. Okay, so we have this, and now up here on the button event, let's just call in this function. Okay, very simple. So this will work for actually showing the window, but now we need to know when to hide it. And for that, let's use something that we've used a few times in this course, but never directly. Let's use a C# delegate. As usual, I have a dedicated video on them. This is basically how you can define a field or a parameter of a type which can hold a function. It's another super useful C# feature. Definitely watch that video to learn all about it. Let's go here on the game input, and down here when we have our rebind binding, over here let's receive a second parameter. This one is going to be of type action. This is one of the built-in delegates. It takes no parameters and returns void. So this one is perfect for a simple callback just like this one. Let's call it on action rebound. And we're going to trigger this right here after we achieve the callback. So we get the callback, let's trigger this just like that. And let's also get rid of these testing logs, we no longer need them, so just like this. Now back here on the options UI, so we've got that, and for the second parameter, let's just pass in the function to hide that window. So hide the press the rebind key. That's it. Again, remember, we're passing in the function itself, we're not calling it, so there's no parentheses. We're just passing in the function itself. Okay, so with this, let's test. So here on the options, let's rebind the move W, and there you go, it does show up the window, and now if I press a key, yep, there you go, that one hides. Okay, great. So this is working, but over here the text is still not updating. So over here on the second callback, instead of just calling this function, we need to call this and then also call the update visual function. So as usual, let's use a simple lambda expression to do exactly both. So let's open and close the parentheses, and we do exactly this. So we hide the press the rebind, and then we update the visual. Okay, that's it, let's test. So here we are, let's rebind the move W, press on the T key, and there you go, it did rebind and it did update. Alright, great. Now let's just apply this to all of the other bindings. So first up here on the buttons, let's set listeners to all the buttons. So that's the move left, actually the move down, then the move left, move right, the interact button, the interact alternate button, and finally the pause button. And for the bindings, this one is the pause binding, the interact alternate, then the interact, then the move, this one is the right. Again, make sure you don't make mistakes here, you call them the exact same one. So the move down, okay, so all of it is correct here. And over here on the player input, let's do a switch on our binding. So K's move up, we do something. And now we could write this code directly up here and then make a move down and write a bunch more code. That would work, but that would be way too wordy. So let's write our code in a nice clean way. Basically, the only thing we need down here is we need to know the actual action we're going to rebind, and we need to know the action index. So let's just find up here exactly that. So an input action for the input action, and then an int for the binding index. Okay, and then over here, when we have the switch for all of our bindings, we just set those. So the input action, in this case, it's going to be the player input actions, player, and it's the move action. And for the binding index, this one is on index 1. Then we're going to have the other moves. So the move down is going to be on index 2. Then left and right. These are on index 3 and 4. Okay, so we have all these, and now for the other ones. So for the interact, this is the interact action on binding 0. Then we've got the interact alternate and the pause. So interact alternate and the pause. And this one is the pause action and the interact alternate action, and all of them are on binding index of 0. Okay, so that's good. So over here we are assigning the input action and the binding index. And also one thing, we need to make sure to always assign these values. So let's make sure to add a default here, just make sure it always works. Okay, great. So now down here, instead of always accessing the move, let's access whatever is stored in the input action. And for the binding, whatever it is on the binding index. Okay, so now this will work with all of our bindings. So here we are, and let's try rebinding all of them. So let's put them over here on the side. So for the move up, let's put it on T, down on G, A on F, then D on H. For the interact on Y, interact out on J, and for the escape, let's put it on E. Okay, so all these keys have been rebound. Let's just make sure they work. So here I am moving with these keys, and yep, it does work. Go up here to interact, and do the alt interact, and now the pause, and yep, there you go, everything works perfectly. All right, awesome. So everything worked perfectly, although again, we have the same issue as previously. So all the keys have been rebound, so it's all correct, great. However, now if I stop playing, and now if I play again, and nope, there's the issue, the rebinding was lost. So just like with the sound, we also need to save the new state. Now, thankfully, the new input system has a function that makes that super easy. Let's go down to where we are rebinding things. And when we finish rebinding, let's just go into the player input actions. And let's call this function the save bindings overrides as JSON. This one is going to return a JSON string. Now, if you don't know what is JSON, go watch my quick video on it. Basically, it's a super easy to understand and widely used file format. It's very easy to read and modify. It's a format where it's stored as just text. So let's look at what this says. Let's do a debug.log over here after rebinding something. Let's see. So here, if I rebind one of these, and if there you go, there we have our JSON. So the override bindings that overrode the move on this ID on this new path. So basically, we just need to store this string somewhere, and just like we did with the sound, let's just store it in the player prefs. So first, let's define our constant. So private const string for the player prefs bindings, and let's call this the input bindings. Okay, just like this. So then down here, after we rebind the key, let's go into player prefs, and let's set a string on the player prefs bindings, and we're going to save the overrides as JSON. And after we do, let's just make sure the player prefs is correctly saved. Okay, so that saves it. Then let's go on awake to load it. So over here on awake, let's load that. Let's first do a quick test to see if there's a save. So if the player prefs, if it has a key, and if it has this key. If so, then let's get it. So the player prefs, let's get the string on this key. That returns the string, and we're going to use the string. Let's just go into the player input actions. And let's call the function load binding overrides from JSON just like this. And also let's make sure we do this right after we construct the object and before we enable the action map. Okay, so that's really it. Let's test. So here we are, let's rebind the move up to T. Okay, it rebound. Now stop playing. Now play again. And yep, here it is, still rebound to T. All right, awesome. Okay, so here we created a really nice options menu where we can modify the volume and rebind keys. The only issue that we still have is that we can only navigate the menus with the mouse. So let's add support for menu navigation with a controller in the next lecture.